farther ado, I am going to pull up the correct presentation, the one that you guys are actually here to see, and introduce Captain Wendy Lawrence, astronaut, who is going to be our keynote speaker. Can we get a round of applause for her? Thank you.
Well, I applaud you all for coming on probably the last awesome day of this year and spending it inside, but at least you have a truly phenomenal view. And I'm happy to be with you this evening, just to speak with you a little bit. I want to leave a lot of time for question and answers, so if you have a question, I will do my best to get to it. But I do want to tell you a little bit of my story, and then tell you what it's like to be in space and the impact it has, and related to what you're doing today and tomorrow. So, you're pretty quickly going to figure out how old I am. Perfectly fine. But for astronauts who are of my generation, we had the privilege of growing up during Apollo. And yes, pretty much each and every one of us can tell you exactly where we were when Apollo 11 landed and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin got out to take those very historic first steps on the moon. Me personally, just turned 10, growing up in Southern California. I'm pretty sure it was still a black and white television that we had at home. Not that it really mattered, because pretty much everything coming back was still in black and white. But nevertheless, if you ask me what it was about watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin bounce and shuffle along the lunar surface, I will honestly tell you, I don't know. To this day, I can't put it into words, but like millions of kids around the world, that suddenly became the dream. Yeah, I wanted to grow up and be an astronaut because it looked like a really, really fun job. So that's where I set my sights. No, I didn't really sit down as a 10-year-old to ponder how to make it come true. But getting into my high school years, still very much had the dream. My dad gave me some pretty simple advice. In hindsight, excellent advice. He said, why don't you study what people who've been selected by NASA to become astronauts, study what they did. Now remember, this was pre-internet. I'm old. So you had to do it the hard way. You had to go to the library. You had to dig through books. But it all finished high school, all gone on to college. Many had studied engineering, science as well. A lot had gone into the military. They learned how to fly. It's a little bit of family tradition. For me, my mom's dad was in the Navy. He was actually stationed at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island in the mid-40s. He went to the Naval Academy, Navy pilot. My dad went to the Naval Academy, Navy pilot. My senior year of high school was the first year that women went to the Service Academy, so I thought, I'll just go to the Naval Academy, learn how to fly. That's what I did. Unlike my dad and my grandfather, I thought, airplanes, kind of boring. Helicopters, really a lot of fun. It's pretty nice to be able to fly backwards and sideways. And neat thing about being a helicopter pilot in the United States Navy is on any given flight, you are basically a combination of an Amazon delivery driver, a Pizza Hut delivery driver, and like Uber. You call, we haul. You cry, we fly. That was the squadron motto. What I also liked about it was you're always part of the team. 2 pilots, 2 aircrew personnel on board. You're challenged to figure out how to accomplish your mission. And probably you've already encountered today, not everything goes as you planned. You don't have everything figured out. You get those curveballs thrown at you. You gotta come back together and figure out, how are we gonna overcome this obstacle? What are we gonna do instead? All that was great training for life as an astronaut. So I finished the United States Naval Academy in 1981. Went to flight training immediately after that, got to my first operational squadron in 1983. And for the young folks who are in this room, a little bit of history lesson. That period of time, if you were serving in the United States military, was what we called the Cold War. Your enemy was the Soviet Union. You were trained to go to war against them. I end up at NASA in 1992. I do my first shuttle mission, which is an astronomy flight. I come back from that mission and I volunteer for a program called Shuttle Mir. Inside of NASA, this program was called Phase 1 because it was basically the precursor program to the International Space Station program, known as Phase 2. And thanks to President Clinton, he wanted us to no longer work against the Soviet Union, now Russia. He wanted us to treat them as partners. And for somebody like myself, who had been out to sea in the Mediterranean, who'd gone up to the North Atlantic, who'd been overflown by Soviet aircraft, followed by aircraft from the US, who'd been trailed by Soviet naval warships. First and foremost, I had seen the tensions of the Cold War. But I finished my first flight and was like, you're going to Russia. What? You're gonna go to Russia. You're gonna serve as NASA's Director of Operations in Star City. Star City used to be a secret Russian Soviet Union Air Force base. It is the home of the Cosmonaut Training Center. I'm still on active duty in the United States Navy. And my tasking from my Commander-in-Chief, President Clinton, my tasking from senior NASA leadership is, go figure out how to work with the Russians. I don't care that they had been your enemy. I don't care that you had been trained to go to war against them. You handful of NASA astronauts over there, you gotta go figure out how to make this work. And the idea behind this Shuttle Mir program was that ultimately 7 NASA astronauts would go do long-duration missions on board the Russian Space Station Mir. Couple advantages for NASA. One, working with the Russian Space Agency, again, similar to what it had done in the mid-1970s with a program called the Apollo-Soyuz test program. 2, it gave NASA an opportunity to get more experience having its astronauts spend months at a time in space. NASA had only done this briefly with the Skylab program, but now here was an opportunity to do it on board Mir before you do it for decades with the International Space Station. So myself and several other NASA astronauts, this was our mission. Go figure out how to make it work. And again, as somebody who was on active duty in the military, this was really quite a unique experience. I never wanted to be in Russia one day, because I would have been there for one reason and one reason only, to do what I've been trying to do, which is to go to war against them. But lo and behold, here I am. And things that I remembered also as a kid watching on television, like military parades rolling through Red Square, all the Soviet tanks and troops marching through. Suddenly I get to go walk around Red Square on my own, see it with my own eyes, as kind of a NASA civilian, so to speak. Really an amazing experience, something I never thought I would have happen in my life. But what the real focus was for this handful of NASA astronauts to train over in Russia, to learn the Soyuz crew transportation spacecraft, to learn the Russian Space Station Mir. As I mentioned, we had a small NASA office over there. Initially, I was the head of that office. We hired Russian citizens to work for us, to be our interpreters, our translators, to drive vans around for us. And this also, a really remarkable experience, to see us come together and work as one, to put aside some of the differences. And what we had to do was recognize that most of those differences really aren't driven by us personally. They were imposed by the governments that we had and the way they used to work decades ago. But this was our choice to see past that and start to look for what we all had in common and try and figure out how to build on that as a foundation. So I had a chance to go to the Russian Space Station Mir as a shuttle crew member. This is a picture from my first flight there, STS-86, and really a sign of things to come in the International Space Station program. We, in our composition of STS-86, were an international crew. Yes, we had a handful of NASA astronauts, but we also had a Russian cosmonaut flying with us and an astronaut from the European Space Agency. So that glue that was beginning to draw the program together. Probably one of the most surreal experiences that I've ever had in my life was on my second flight to Mir, STS-91. When I was a young naval officer, If you honestly ask me, I will tell you, I never thought I'd be selected as an astronaut. You know, that to me was probably a pipe dream. But lo and behold, I get selected. I never thought that would happen. As a young naval officer, I also never really thought I would end up in Russia as a helicopter pilot. So to suddenly be in space, you know, floating around one evening, singing Beatles songs in English with a Russian cosmonaut was also something that I never really thought would happen in my life. But Taga Busabayev, commander of the Russian Space Station Mir on STS-91, the last shuttle flight there, I think you can tell from the picture, loves to sing, loves to play the guitar, big fan of the Beatles. So we called down to Mission Control and said, hey, can you send us up the lyrics to several Beatles songs? Your choice. Just, you know, send them up in English. And they did. We had free time, so we're floating around. We're singing Beatles songs in English. So space flight, really a unique experience. International Space Station, I think, is, as history looks back on it, it's not gonna be the scientific accomplishments. It's not gonna be the engineering accomplishments. What historians will say is the highlight of both Shuttle Mir and International Space Station programs is it shows that when we humans choose to come together, when we choose to look past our differences, to focus on what we have in common, we truly can take those swords, those proverbial swords, and actual swords right now, given what's happened today and what's going on in Ukraine, we can take those swords and we can beat them into plowshares. We can do some amazing things together very peacefully. And that, again, is a hallmark of the 20 years of human experience on board the International Space Station. People from all walks of life, many different countries, coming together to do things peacefully in space. This picture, I think, is a great example of the power of what we're doing on ISS. A NASA astronaut, an astronaut from Canada, an astronaut from the European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, Russian Space Agency. This is commonplace now on board the ISS. And yes, that experience does change your life. We get to see the world in a very different way. And it impacts you. It changes you as a person. Because when we look out the window, borders and boundaries, they're not obvious to us. We get to see the Earth, particularly in the daylight part of the orbit, against this intensely black, seemingly endless void of space. And that black expanse makes Earth look small, it makes it look fragile. We all come back with an increased sense of responsibility for taking care of this planet. We also come back with a very strong sense of, this is it, folks. This is what we have. This is what we all have in common. We are all crew members of Spaceship Earth. And it's up to all of us to figure out how we're gonna do this together to ensure its survival. So I hope you get a sense of that through the projects that you're working on today, the challenges that you're taking on. Is that space truly can be a medium through which we can unite ourselves, which we can choose to focus on things that we have in common. We can choose to work together, and we can make some very powerful progress for the good of all of us down here on planet Earth. And that's the motto for the International Space Station. Off the planet for the planet. And that's kind of the mindset you come back to Earth with. We're working off the planet to improve life back here on our own planet. And we'll do this much more effectively when we put aside things that we perceive as differences and try and find in each and every one of us the things that we have in common and choose to build on that. So with that, I'll get off a little bit of my soapbox and turn it over to you all. And feel free if you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you wanna know how, what do you eat in space? What else do you do in space? What sort of research? Fire away.
I was curious, so I saw that you went to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I was wondering if you got to see like any development of the Alvin or like different deep
Yes.
submarines.
Yes, so I studied ocean engineering. I had an opportunity through the United States Navy, thank you very much, to do a joint program at MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So part of my academic year was spent down at Woods Hole. My thesis advisor was there. I happened to be at Woods Hole the same time that Bob Ballard was going out to find the Titanic, which he had very well kept under wraps. It wasn't until he came back and he was successful that he told the rest of the Woods Hole campus that, yes, we found it. So some of my fellow ocean engineering students were working with him on Alvin and some of the other deep sea submersibles and ROVs that they were developing to support that mission. So not that I understood all of their robotics, but it was pretty fun to go over to their lab. Yes?
When you first went into zero G, how did it feel like?
Like you were profoundly uncoordinated. It's fun. Once you get used to no gravity, it is all of your childhood dreams of flying around like Superman and a bird come true. It is incredible to be able to push off. This is one of the things you learn. Gentle is not what you think it is. You have to redefine what gentle means when you push off very gently from the wall and relax and glide and just be perfectly suspended in the middle of the air. It is fun to not have to fight gravity. You don't have any understanding of how much gravity dominates life down here on Earth until you get to go to space and not have to contend with it. So really, really fun. But for me, there is definitely a learning curve. My first flight in particular, my first 24 hours in space were pretty ugly. I had to figure out how to control my body. How many of you have taken physics? Good, okay, you'll understand this. I contend that you truly do not understand center of mass until you go to space. You know, momentum, torque, you know, the first time I had to move around, I wasn't thinking about it, and I was holding on to something like this, and I thought, okay, it's time to push off and glide. Okay, where's my center of mass? Here. What's gonna happen when I push off up here? Oh yeah, I go tumbling across the mid-deck. My commander is just laughing at me because he's like, ha, rookie flyer, you've never done this before. This is fun to watch you flail. He grabs me, he lowers me, gets me under control, and I'm like, oh, now I get it. Center of mass, yeah, so if I just make sure everything's like this, then I can maintain my body position, and I can truly just glide rather than flail. And then once you get comfortable and you get a sense of controlling your body, you really can fly around like Superman. In fact, there was a Russian cosmonaut on my last flight, Sergei Krikalev. During our mission, he was a crew member on board the International Space Station. At that point, he had gone over 700 accumulated days in space. Any of you have ever seen any of the high-performance demonstration squadrons like Thunderbirds or Blue Angels? They do something called a 4-point roll. The jet will be flying like this and it turns 90 degrees. Sergei can do that with his body. It was amazing to watch him just go screaming down through the module. It's really hard. We all tried it, the shuttle crew. You were ugly. When you get good at it, it is just this free, completely freeing environment. Very fun. Better than pool.
I have two questions, but they're related. So one, have you ever gotten homesick, and what was that like? And two, would you ever live in space, like live in Mars?
So to your first question, I did shorter shuttle duration missions. So when you take my 4 flights together, I've only spent about 50 days in space. Shuttle flights, you had a lot to accomplish. So our mindset was you get to space, work. Similar to what you all are doing this weekend. Very much a sprint. Crew members on board space station, that's a marathon. They are truly living in space. I visited space, they live in space. So over the course of 6 months, 9 months, Frank Rubio just came back after spending 371 days in space. Yeah, you miss things on Earth. You miss the birthdays, your kids growing up, anniversaries, other special events. So yeah, for them, that's much more of a challenge. And that's one of the key lessons that NASA had an opportunity to learn through the Shuttle Mir program. Is yes, you have to support the crew members physically, you have to take care of their physical concerns, but those psychological concerns are probably far more important in the long run. So you have to spend your resources to make sure the crew members in space can stay well connected with people on Earth. So there is now the ability to literally Zoom. They typically do that on the weekends. They have the ability to use internet protocol-based phone to call people, which is very fun to get a phone call from space. It's like, hi Earth, this is space, how you doing? It's pretty cool. So that's really, really helped. Now, let's think about what happens when you go to Mars. None of that two-way communication is gonna occur. It's all gonna be one way. And I think psychologically, that's gonna be pretty challenging for a crew. Would I go do Mars? Absolutely. I would love to do a mission to Mars. However, I do wanna come back. That's pretty much all I ask. I want my mission to be round trip. Yes?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the type of research that you were doing up in space, and also to the sort of international collaboration, how that sort of played out.
So let's go back and look at the space station. I'm gonna talk more to what's going on right now, more the International Space Station, because it's really an intensive suite of research experiments that are being done. So, with the exception of Canada, every participating space agency has built their own laboratory module. It just so happens that the NASA laboratory module is also a national laboratory for the entire United States. So there's a European laboratory module, Japanese, a couple parts to it, NASA's, and Russians kind of sprinkled it throughout their modules. So the space station is a platform where you can look both out to space to do some astronomy and look back at Earth. So out on this truss structure, there are a wide variety of sensors. Many of them are Earth facing. We're using them for basically climate change related observations, water stress, heat stress, carbon emissions. All of that gets into NASA's climate data repository, which is shared with the European Space Agency, available for anybody to use down here on planet Earth. There's also something called the alpha magnetic spectrometer, which is essentially a 3-ton magnet. We flew the test article on my 3rd shuttle flight. It points to deep space. It's looking for antimatter, which it has detected. On board, a lot of the research is related to how do things behave differently in the absence of gravity. So there are research on humans. You know, when you are up there as a crew member, we are studying how the body does over long duration in the absence of gravity, some of the changes that occur, some of the impact of bone development, muscles. Material science is an interesting field because things mix very differently when gravity's not the dominant force. So you can create different types of metallic alloys. Protein crystal growth does much better in space. If you have anything that's a crystalline structure, it will do better in the microgravity environment. It tends to, protein crystals that are grown by the pharmaceutical companies for drug research, those crystals are bigger, they're more perfect. Gravitation, gravity causes sedimentation basically causes defects in the crystal structure. Better research. Growing fiber optics in space, again, more perfect structure. A new emerging field is 3D printing. Not just with plastic, but with tissues that you can use in the human body. So there's a 3D fabrication facility on board the station, for lack of a better description, that recently printed tissue from your knee to create a human meniscus. So if you can do that on a large scale which we can't do on Earth because gravity forces things to grow in 2 dimensions. You can do this on a large scale and do a biofabrication facility. You could, this is a new line of manufacturing, potentially. So some really amazing research. I will tell you probably the most fun thing to observe is fire in space. You can Google this on your own, just do combustion experiments on board the International Space Station, and a ball of fire in space is just different than what it is down on Earth. Really fascinating. Yes?
What were some of the big changes that you saw in space exploration and space industry during your career, and what are some that are top of mind for you as we look to the next decade or two?
So, despite what Elon Musk says, okay, he did not create reusability. He just happened to enter the space industry at a time where technology was far enough along that you could actually make it affordable. So when you look at the design of the space shuttle, parts were reused, okay? But the space shuttle was designed in the 60s and 70s, built in the 70s. So you didn't have the advantage of some of the testing techniques and diagnostic techniques we have now, the computer capability. Moreover, you didn't have anything called a GPS constellation of satellites. So why cannot Elon fly his boosters back to a precise location? Because we have GPS now. When you first designed the space shuttle and you had the solid rocket boosters that you wanted to reuse, there's no GPS constellation. It would have been incredibly difficult to do all of the engineering to have them fly back to the Kennedy Space Center. Well, not so much difficult, it wouldn't have been cost affordable because of the engineering analysis and all the equipment that you have to put on board. So the fact that, we've got 60 years of doing this now, a long history of launching things into space, we understand how to do it. We've got better computing capability to support that, testing capability. The reusability part to me is the key piece to driving down the cost of space launch in particular. Now, am I a proponent of his Starship design? I don't know. I hope he doesn't blow it up next time. I think he needs to do a little bit more testing before he launches, but we'll see what he does. The other thing I like is the fact that we're beginning to get a commercial marketplace. And so companies like Redwire, Made in Space, smaller companies can come up with an idea and now have a way to get it flown in space relatively affordably. You have a platform on board the International Space Station to do some of your science. You're soon gonna have some commercial space stations in low Earth orbit. So this idea that we can truly have a commercial marketplace in space aside from launching satellites, I'm interested to see how all that plays out. Yes?
Yeah, it's an honor to hear you speak, and you're the first astronaut that I have met. But my question is, what are your thoughts on Artemis 2, and what are you excited about? What's to come in the future for space travel?
So Artemis 2, I'm excited that there's a crew named and that they're well into their training flow. The rocket is progressing along, their spacecraft is progressing along. So I think it'll be very, very exciting for them to have a chance to head back to the moon and orbit around it for a little bit and do a checkout of Orion and make sure that it's truly gonna perform well with humans on board. I'm looking forward to seeing humans go back in a few years to actually land. So I'm gonna be paying very close attention to what SpaceX is doing with their lunar lander development along with Blue Origin. Just got the second contract for that, which I think was a smart move on the part of NASA. Now why go back to the moon? It's interesting, when you listen to my colleagues from the Apollo program, they will poo-poo this. They're like, well, we went directly to the moon for the first time, let's go directly to Mars. Okay, we could probably do that if we really set our mind to it and maybe pull that off in 15 years. But is that really, from an engineering perspective, is that the smartest approach? Now, I've got a master's in engineering. I come from a world of, everything was about trying to determine what part of your mission was risky, and then come up with a plan to minimize that. So I'm all about minimizing the chance of something bad happening. So when I look at the plan from just an engineering perspective, I wanna go to the moon, I wanna use it as a test bed. I wanna make sure I have a good lander. I wanna make sure I have a viable habitat design. Okay? I wanna make sure that, more importantly, I have a way to protect the crew from radiation. Not enough people are talking about it, but as soon as we leave Earth's magnetic field and we start traveling in deep space, we are bombarding the crew with space-based radiation. And we are gonna increase their crew's chance of getting cancer. So we have to have a shielding mechanism. I wanna test all those things on the moon. Because if something fails catastrophically, because the engineers just fundamentally did not understand how the system was gonna work in this different environment, I want the crew to be able to get back in 2 to 3 days. If this happens to you on board your Mars-bound spacecraft, and you're past the 3-month point, good luck. This is not Hollywood. We're not bringing you back anytime soon. You don't have the ability to fix that problem. You're having a really bad day on board. So for me as an engineer, I say, go to the moon, it's your test bed. The challenge is to not get stuck there. If you really wanna push on to Mars, you've gotta structure your program so that you have the ability to keep going. Not have the moon end up as this off-ramp where you're now stuck and you have no place else to go. Time will tell. Yes?
I was wondering, how is it like to go to space? Like, what's sort of the feeling when you're going to space, when the rocket starts its ignition process?
World's best roller coaster ride. Space shuttle produced 6.5 million pounds of thrust. Space launch system used in the Artemis program is gonna top out over 8 million pounds of thrust. It is a heck of a ride. Now, the way it's designed, it's so powerful you have to put the crew on their back. You want the G-forces to go front to back on the chest. You can't go down the long axis of the body because we literally cause the crew to black out. You just drain all the blood out of their brain. But I remember on my first launch, the engines lit off, the vehicle shook a little bit, and then the solid rocket boosters, I mean, it's like somebody put me in the world's biggest slingshot. You can tell when you leave the launch pad. I mean, it's literally like you've been launched in a slingshot. About 30 seconds later, the elephant is now on your chest. You're like, I cannot breathe. Okay, very heavy, really, really heavy. Ooh, let's do this. No, I don't think so. I'm just gonna lie here. This is awesome. I mean, an incredible acceleration, and you just keep going faster and faster and faster. And then when you get to orbit, and you're going fast enough to stay in orbit, the engine's cut off, and suddenly you're thrown forward in your seat, and everything starts to float. So if you're not doing anything with your arms, the next thing you know, like, your arms are right here. Yeah, I'm floating. Your checklists start to float, so. I like to say the rocket ride never got boring. It was a great way to start your flight. Coming back is surprisingly more rough than you think it is. But when you actually stop to think about the situation, it's like, well, of course it would be. I've just spent the last 2.5 weeks, or maybe just spent the last year in space in this environment where I'm not in a car, I'm not driving over potholes, I'm not walking around or running, I'm just very quiet, you know, I'm gliding through the air all the time. So I have this environment in which I don't have all these external forces acting on me, jostling me around. Except now I'm coming back, and even though it's a relatively smooth ride, everything's greatly amplified. Because the sensors, so to speak, in your ear have been kind of dialed down to 0. So the slightest bump really feels quite dramatic. Yes, sir.
So, I don't know if an engineer would be, having engineering knowledge would be an asset or a deficit, but how do you manage fear? So, you're getting on top of a couple of 100,000 of tons of volatile fuel, and yet you have an intimate knowledge of everything that can go wrong. It must cross your mind, and how do you process it?
Well, it's a personal decision, but I like to answer that question this way, particularly to young kids, is typically we're afraid of something we don't understand, or we don't know very much about. And then what happens? Our imagination gets carried away. So one of the reasons why your training flow is so long is we are trying to learn everything we can. We're trying to practice every situation that we might conceivably encounter during our mission. So certainly, everything we have to do to accomplish the mission, we're gonna practice that. We're gonna do that in the most realistic environment available. So we're introduced to it, we get familiar with it, we get comfortable with it, we ask a lot of questions, we get them answered. So by the time you're finally doing it in space, it's like, I know a lot about this, I'm very comfortable, I'm ready to go. My other counter to that is, particularly in the space shuttle program, and I'm glad to see that it's continued with the crews who are flying on the SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicles. They go meet the people who work on the vehicles. They go meet the people who work in mission control. Part of a shuttle crew, we go down to the Kennedy Space Center regularly. We would meet the individuals who are working on our spacecraft. And when you get to see how dedicated those people were, how much they care about their job, how it becomes their purpose in life to give you a vehicle that's gonna take you to space and, more importantly, bring you back home. When they, in essence, treat you as an extended family member, that instills a lot of confidence in you. And that was really a privilege. Every time you flew was to go down and meet the people who were directly responsible for giving you that spacecraft. Anybody else? I think you get to be the last one.
What's one barrier or any barriers you see from your perspective being in space that's stopping us as a human race from really just, being like, okay guys, we had fun with all this, prejudice stuff, let's come together and actually fix the planet
Us, we are our own obstacles. We can't get out of our own way. We can for a short period of time. I mean, it's amazing. It's always tragic when there's a disaster situation. It is always very heartwarming to see people rise to the occasion, to come together, to try and help people out and ease their pain and their burdens. How we do that for a longer period of time, I don't know. If I had the answer, I would be out there talking to many more groups. But that is our challenge as human beings, is we have got to be more intentional in thinking about this. Everybody's got a lot of baggage to carry around in life. Let's face it, life is not easy. There are a lot of challenges, and you tend to get focused on yourself when you encounter those situations. But we have got to work hard at lifting our head up and not being focused inward all the time, but lifting our head up and looking around and looking for other people who are having similar challenges, struggling in that moment in time, and being willing to put our own issues aside for that moment and reach out to that person. And maybe I have a little bit different perspective, but I'm attuned to that because, but I didn't tell you, and I'll end with this. I was 10 when I wanted to fly in space. It took 25 years for that to happen. Well, that's 25 years of trying to make a dream come true. That was 25 years of realizing I can't do this all on my own. I have got to turn to people for help. And I felt very fortunate because there were a lot of people in my life who wanted to help. Not just my family and friends, but teachers and coaches, classmates, particularly at the colleges I was at. So there are people like that in your life already. So reach out to them, give them the opportunity to help, and then you become that person. So I'm a huge proponent of, for a long period of my time, people were reaching out and helping me along. I want to be that person now who reaches back and helps somebody else along. And I think we need to be more intentional about doing that on a regular basis, No matter what it is that we're doing at that moment in time, lift your head up, look around. Who else can you bring along with you? Who else can you help out at that moment in time? Your generation, I think, has the benefit that you have, we have these wonderfully powerful devices called our phones that can instantly connect us around the world. You are much more aware of what's going on with people of your own age around the world. You are better able to connect with them. So please, I apologize on behalf of my generation, but please continue to do that. Travel if you can. Go live in other countries. Go visit them at a minimum. See these other cultures and realize, man, we really do have so much more in common than we do have, again, those perceived differences. We have so much in common, and let's choose to build on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Captain Lawrence. That was fantastic. Really appreciate your time, and I hope you all were as inspired by that message and story as I was in the back. Can we get another round of applause? Well, now we get to the more boring stuff. But the good news, I don't have anything amazing like that, but the good news is I do have food in the back for everybody, okay? So we are going to, food is good. So it is Mediterranean tonight, and there are vegetarian options. If you are a vegetarian, please save the falafel, or sorry, if you're not vegetarian, please save the falafel for people who are vegetarian. And then there's baklava, there's, you name it. So, like I said, there's gonna be lots of food. Please go grab it. Next time we're gonna be together is for at 7 p.m. for the 240 seconds of excellence. And that is the 4-minute, how to do your pitch in 4 minutes. Awesome? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun to stand between you.